Hey there, welcome to the Her Business Podcast. I'm Suzi Dafnis, and today I want to answer a question from one of our members. And as I was reading it, I thought, I bet there are a lot of women listening who've had this exact thought, but haven't quite known how to put it into words. Now, let me tell you what she wrote. She said, Suzi, I've built a successful business and I have a lot to be grateful for, but lately I can't shake the feeling that I want more. More impact, more freedom, maybe even something completely different. Then I feel guilty for wanting more when I realize I already have so much. How do I know if this feeling is something I should listen to? So I love this question because it's not just about wanting more, at least I don't believe it is. I believe it's about trying to make sense of a feeling that can show up at a particular stage in business, and it can be quite confusing and stressful when it does. And if you're in the early stages of business, you're usually focused on getting traction. You're trying to find clients, build momentum, get your systems in place, maybe hire your first team members, and your attention is on creating something sustainable. But after you've been in business for a while, maybe you've built a great reputation, you have wonderful clients, you've got a stable of products and services that you know work, you've got a team around you, the business is profitable, something else can start to happen. And you look around and you think, this is good, and then almost in the same breath, another thought appears. And that thought is, but is this it? Not in a negative way or because you're unhappy or that you've fallen out with your business. It's just that something feels like it's shifting or it needs to shift. Now, one of the privileges of doing what I do is that I've spent more than 30 years talking with women business owners every day, women in different industries and with different personalities and different business models. But after a while, you start to notice patterns, and this is one of them. And I've had versions of this conversation so many times over the years. Now, it might sound slightly different depending on the woman, but underneath, it's often the same question. I've achieved what I set out to achieve, so why do I feel like there's another chapter waiting for me? And what I find interesting is that the feeling is often accompanied by guilt. Almost as though we're saying, hang on, I asked for this, I worked incredibly hard for this, I should just be happy. And it's that word should that catches my attention, because who decided what gratitude means when we stop growing? Who decided that appreciating what we've built means we shouldn't be curious about what might come next? I don't think those two things are in conflict. I think they sit quite well together. And I can look at my business and feel incredibly grateful for the opportunities it's created, for the people I've met, for the income I've had, for the community that we've built. And at the same time, I can wonder how business needs to evolve as I evolve. Now, those two thoughts do not compete with each other. One doesn't diminish the other. And yet, I think so many women are quietly absorbed. They've absorbed the idea that wanting something different somehow means they're dissatisfied or that they're being ungrateful, which anyway, we'll talk about that. So I don't see it that way. When I think about the women in our community, I don't see women who are constantly chasing more because it's not enough, what they have is not enough, or that nothing is ever enough. It's actually because they want to care deeply about the work that they're doing. Now, these are women who've built businesses that support families, that create employment, that solve real problems out there in the world, and that genuinely make a difference to their clients. They're not asking, how can I get more, just from a more perspective. They're usually asking something like, what do I want for this next season of my business and my life? What do I want it to look like? And to me, that's a very different conversation. And something else really stood out for me in this member's question. She didn't say she wanted more money. Now, there's nothing wrong at all with wanting your business to be more profitable, right? We want our businesses to be profitable. Profit gives us choices. It allows us to invest, to hire more people, to create more opportunities, to give back, to pay ourselves better. Profit matters, but that's not what she was talking about. She said she wanted more freedom, more impact, and maybe even something completely different were her words. And I found that really interesting because those things are much harder to measure. How do you measure freedom? How do you measure impact? Those aren't goals that are necessarily on your business dashboard. They're far more personal. And I wonder whether that's part of why this feels uncomfortable, because once we move beyond measurable success, we're in this territory of meaning. We're asking questions like, is this still the work that I most want to be doing? Is this business supporting the life that I want right now? Am I using my experience in the best possible way? And those questions don't always have simple answers, and they don't come with these neat, tied up in a bow kind of KPIs. But I think they're some of the most important questions that we can ask ourselves. And something I've noticed over the years is that the business we build is often a reflection of who we are at any point in our lives. And think about when you started your business. Who were you then? What mattered to you then? What were you trying to create? And for some women, it was flexibility while their children were young. For others, it was financial independence. For others, it was simply proving to themselves that they could build something on their own. Or moving out of a corporate role into self-employment. Those goals are important, and they're often exactly the right goals for that stage of your life. But we are not static as humans. Hopefully, we're learning and growing all the time. Hopefully, we're becoming more confident. Hopefully, we're discovering what lights us up and also identifying what drains us. So doesn't it make sense that the business might need to evolve as you evolve? And sometimes I think we expect our business to keep fitting us perfectly, even though we are no longer the same person who started it. That's a big expectation. Imagine expecting a jacket that you bought and loved wearing 20 years ago to fit exactly the same today. Not because your body's changed, but maybe your style's changed, or your tastes have changed, or who you are has changed, or what your lifestyle is, right? Something back then doesn't necessarily fit the same way or fit exactly as it did now. And businesses can be like that. The business isn't wrong, the woman isn't wrong. It's possible that they are just no longer perfectly aligned. And when that happens, I think our instinct is to push the feeling away, to tell ourselves we're being silly, we're just getting distracted, we remind ourselves just how fortunate we are. Sometimes we even compare ourselves to people who would love to be in our position and think we should count our lucky stars. And perspective is healthy and gratitude is healthy, but I don't think gratitude means that we should ignore our growth. In fact, I think the opposite is true. If we're paying attention, growth usually asks something of us. It asks us to be more honest, more intentional, more willing to ask questions that don't have immediate answers. And I think that's where this member is. She's not saying, I've made a decision. She says, I have a feeling, and that is a big difference. And one of the things I've learned is that we don't have to turn every feeling into taking action right away. Sometimes we just need to stay curious that little bit longer, to sit in the pocket of the feeling. And so instead of asking immediately, what should I do? Maybe we want to be asking, what is this feeling trying to show me? Because feelings have a way of getting our attention. Sometimes they're pointing to burnout. And I know that one. I've been there a couple of times. Sometimes they're pointing to an opportunity. Sometimes they're pointing to a part of ourselves that's ready to be expressed in a different way if only we would just listen. We don't know yet, and that's okay. We don't have to rush to feeling certain. I actually think certainty is a little overrated, and curiosity, uncertainty, far more useful. Curiosity leaves room for discovery of things we didn't even think about. It leaves room for new conversations, for experimenting, for changing our minds, for noticing what really gives us energy. And I think that's where I'd encourage this member to begin, not by making a dramatic decision, but by becoming a student of her own curiosity. Because the truth is, your next chapter rarely arrives fully formed. I can tell you that from experience. It doesn't just knock on your door and say, here I am. Here's your next chapter. More often, it begins as this quiet nudge, this whisper of a thought, a recurring thought, a question that keeps coming back, a feeling in our gut. And whether we listen to it or not, that's where the interesting part begins. I'm glad this feeling is closer for this listener. Now here's the second half, picking up exactly there. One of the questions that came to mind when I was thinking about this episode was, where does that guilt come from? The guilt of wanting more. Because it's interesting, isn't it? If someone said to you, I'd like to become a better leader, or I want to be a better parent, or I want to become healthier, most of us would say, of course you would, go get it. We don't see those aspirations as criticism of where we are today. We see them as part of being human and evolving. But when it comes to our businesses, and particularly as women business owners, wanting more can somehow feel different. It can feel selfish or indulgent, almost as though we're saying what we've built is not enough. And I don't think that's what's happening at all. I think many of us have inherited stories about what it means to be good, to be grateful, to not ask for too much, to not make people uncomfortable, to not appear too ambitious. Makes me upset just even saying what I'm saying. And I'm not suggesting every woman has had the same experience. We all come from different families and different cultures about, what's okay to dream. How big can you dream? I do think many of us have absorbed messages, sometimes subtly, that once we've achieved a certain level of success, we should be grateful, we should be content. And yet when I look at the women in our Her Business community, I don't see women who are driven by greed. I see women who are driven by purpose, and there's a big difference. Purpose often asks us to keep growing because our capacity to contribute keeps growing. Think about your own business journey. I imagine there are things that you can do today that you just couldn't have done even 5 years ago. You have more experience, you have better judgment, you've made mistakes and you've learnt from them. You've developed wisdom that only comes from doing something for a while, from being in business for a while. So wouldn't it make sense that you'd want to use that wisdom in new ways, in different ways? That is not greed. It is actually stewardship, making the most of what you've learned, sharing it, making the most of the opportunities that you've created, and perhaps making a different kind of contribution than the one that you even had the capacity to make when you first started. And that's another reason I noticed the words that our member used. She didn't say, I want a bigger business. She said, I want more impact, more freedom. And I think those two words are worth sitting with just for a moment, because freedom means different things at different stages of business. And in the beginning, freedom might mean replacing the salary of the job that you left to start your own business. And a few years later, freedom might mean having a team that means you don't have to be involved in every decision. And later still, it might mean having enough space in your week to think strategically instead of constantly being in the doing and the delivering. Or perhaps it means taking 6 weeks off without worrying that everything is going to fall apart. Freedom evolves because we evolve. Impact evolves too. Now, in the beginning, making an impact might simply mean helping one client at a time. Then perhaps it's creating a service or a product that helps hundreds of people or thousands of people. Maybe impact becomes mentoring others in your industry. Maybe you write, maybe you speak, maybe you advocate for something that matters deeply to you. So the form of your impact changes, but the desire underneath is often the same: to use what you've learned in service of something bigger than yourself. I'm seeing that happen right now with someone I'm mentoring. She's been in her industry for over 20 years. She is exceptional at it. She is bored with her day-to-day business. And so one of the areas she's moving into is impact, by mentoring and working with younger people in her industry who are just learning what it's like to run a business in that industry. And she is so lit up by this idea of the impact she can make. So I don't think this episode is about wanting more, it's about wanting different. And that is a subtle distinction, but a really important one. Because if you're chasing more simply because you think it'll make you feel successful, you'll probably discover that finish line, it keeps moving. And we've seen that happen. I'll be happy when I reach 6 figures. No, when I have 7 figures. I'll be happy when I have 10 staff. I'll be happy when I win that award. And the goal is reached, and before long, there's another bigger goal. And that kind of more is exhausting because it is us constantly trying to prove ourselves. But there's another kind of more that feels quite different. And it doesn't come from a sense of lack or not being good enough. It comes from a sense of being ready. It's quieter and it sounds more like, I think I'm ready for a new challenge, or I think I have something else to contribute now, or this part of the business doesn't light me up the way it used to. Just being able to say that is so powerful. And I don't think these thoughts are something to be afraid of. I think they're worth listening to with curiosity rather than judging yourself or having yourself feel bad about yourself. And that doesn't mean we're going to jump on and act on every idea that pops into our head. Goodness knows, if we did that, we'd all be having multiple businesses and scattered attention and all those things, right? We don't want to do that. But it does mean creating enough space in your life to hear yourself think. And this is something we don't do enough as business owners. I think we're pretty bad at it, actually, most of the time. So we're such in a response mode, whether we're responding to our clients or our teams or to the emails or to the social media messages or to opportunities or problems. We're really good at responding at what's happening around us, and we're not always good at listening to what's happening within us, inside of us. And sometimes the most valuable work that we can do isn't another marketing strategy or another planning session. Sometimes it's taking ourselves out for a walk with a notebook and saying, hey, what's changing for me? What part of my work feels heavy? What part of my work gives me energy? If I were building this business today, we might ask ourselves, knowing everything I know, what would I do exactly the same? What would I do differently? And I think those are fascinating questions, not because they'll give you an answer immediately, but because they begin that conversation with yourself. And often that's where clarity starts. Just by starting to reflect and question and start this conversation with yourself. And one of the things that I've observed over the years is that when women ignore these feelings for too long, they start to assume that there's something wrong with them, that they've lost their motivation, their mojo, they're burnt out, they need to work harder to get their goals. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes rest is exactly what's needed. Sometimes the issue actually isn't exhaustion, it's that the business has stayed the same or become stagnant while you've continued to grow, while your life circumstances have changed. And the business that still reflects the woman you were 5 or 10 years ago is not the business that you want now. You've changed. Your business might simply be asking you to change. And sometimes you know that's happening because the stats aren't showing up. The results aren't showing up. The goals that you're missing, something is off. But I find this thought incredibly hopeful because you don't have to walk away from everything you've built necessarily. You might simply need to reshape it so that it reflects who you are today. I've been going through this exact process over the last 18 months, reshaping the business, reshaping my offers, reshaping my business model, reshaping how I show up. It's a very different proposition to say I simply need to reshape this business so that it reflects who I am. And I see women that I work with closely do this. They change their offers. They change who their ideal client is. They step more into leadership. They create businesses that depend on them less. They find new ways to share their expertise, just like my mentoree who I mentioned is now going to be mentoring young people in her industry, and she's so excited. None of those changes happened because they were dissatisfied necessarily with what they built or had any regrets. They happened because they were willing to ask, what does the next season look like? And I think that's the invitation in this member's question. Not should I blow everything up? Should I burn it all down? Not should I start from scratch? Simply, what season am I in right now? And perhaps that's the question I want to leave you with today. Not whether you should want more, but whether you're willing to get curious about what more actually means for you, because your answer will almost certainly be different from mine and different from the member who asked this question. Your version might be working 3 days a week. It might be mentoring the next generation. It might be writing a book you've always wanted to write. It might be doubling the size of your business because that is what genuinely excites you. And not one of those aspirations is better than another. What matters is that they're yours, that you feel connected to them, that they're speaking to that inner voice that's calling for you to make a change, that they reflect who you've become. One of the reasons I value Her Business Growth Network so much is it's one of the few places where these conversations happen openly. Now, of course, we talk about strategy and marketing and teams and systems and growing profitable businesses. Those things are important. But we also create space for questions like this one, questions about identity, about leadership, about what's changing now. Because business isn't just about building something out there. It's also about who you're becoming in the process. That's why our tagline is growing you, growing your business. And I think one of the greatest gifts of being surrounded by women who are on a similar journey is that they remind us that we're not odd for asking these questions. In fact, it's a sign that we're paying attention. So if today's conversation resonated with you and you're looking for a community of women who are growing not just businesses but meaningful businesses, I'd love to invite you to join us inside the Growth Network. You can just head over to herbusinessnetwork.com. We are having conversations like this every single month, and they're conversations with women who understand exactly what it's like to build a business over the long term, women who know that growth isn't just about revenue. Sometimes growth is about rediscovering what matters most and shaping a business that reflects that. So to the member who sent in this question, thank you so much. I have a feeling that you've given voice to something that many women have been thinking about. And my hope is that in answering your question, that everybody who listens to this episode feels drawn towards something that is more aligned with them, who listens to that voice and doesn't dismiss themselves, but takes it as a sign that they've grown. And when we allow ourselves to do that with curiosity rather than guilt, we create the possibility for our businesses to grow with us. If you are new to the show, thank you so much for being here. Please subscribe and follow for next week's episode and every episode thereafter. If you're a regular listener, thank you so much for being here, for recommending this program, for leaving reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all the places that you show us your love. I'm so happy to be here. As I said, if you want more access to me, access to incredible women who are having deep, important conversations, then head over to herbusinessnetwork.com. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time right here on the Her Business Podcast. Bye for now.